So today, we're starting a new series that I'm excited about called Unlikely Heroes. And we're going to be talking through some of those hero characters that you encounter throughout the Bible, but we're going to just twist it just a little bit, kind of the way we do around here. It's not going to be the hooray, look at how God saved the day again through these people, look at how awesome they are. We're going to take a little different spin on it. Here's how I'd explain our approach. Like, everybody loves an underdog, right? And unless you're a Yankees fan, everyone loves an underdog. For the most part, we love those stories of people who, through hard work, dedication, and integrity, they overcome great obstacles and achieve something that seemed vastly out of reach. And as I start a series on unlikely heroes from the Bible, that might be the kind of stories you'd expect to hear. We can immediately think of episodes like David slaying Goliath, right? Or even the disciples rising from meager beginnings to become the leaders of the Jesus movement. That's what you'd expect, and so you know that's not what I'm going to give you. This month we're going to talk about the shadow side of some of the characters from the Bible who were real characters, if you know what I mean. There's a murdering coward named Moses. There's a foreign prostitute named Rahab. There's a teen mom named Mary. And we're going to peel away the veneer of Bible hero that we usually apply to these characters and look at them as real, flawed people. Because here's the thing. When we start with the assumption that these people from the Bible had something special going on because, well, you know, they made the Bible, we run the risk of thinking that what they did back then is somehow impossible for us to achieve right now. And the thing I want to accomplish over the next 4 weeks is to help us see that God uses normal people. God uses normal people to do amazing things, and I want for us to allow this question to hover in the room. Here's the question: what amazing thing might I be able to do if I let God work through me? And we're going to start the conversation with this guy named Joseph. But I can't talk about Joseph without talking about his family of origin. In fact, you know, when you talk about family of origin, it explains a lot about a lot of us, actually. You know, some of you came to church here for years, and then I met your parents, and I was like, oh, I get that now. And the same goes for Joseph's father, Jacob. So Jacob was the younger son of Isaac and the grandson of Abraham, like the Abraham. So these three men, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, are sometimes collectively known as the patriarchs because they are the fathers of the tradition that would become the Hebrew people and the Jewish faith. And there's this weird pattern that takes place from Abraham to Isaac, and then again from Isaac to Jacob. And so here's how it goes. It was the tradition back then, and you've probably heard this because it shows up in the Gospels and the stories of Jesus too. It's the tradition for the oldest son to receive the vast majority of the inheritance from generation to generation. But in each of these cases, from Abraham to Isaac and from Isaac to Jacob, the younger son was the one to get the blessing and the inheritance. Isaac was picked over his brother Ishmael. Jacob was picked over his brother Esau. And sometimes this was even through deception. But that didn't change the fact that the deed was done. And the future biblical authors, people who thought and wrote about this later on, looked back at this as a sign of the way that God chooses, well, whoever God chooses. That God doesn't choose people based on patterns or expectations. God chooses who God chooses. And it's with this in mind that we get to Joseph. Joseph was not the younger of two brothers. He was the 11th out of 12. And he was far from the top of the list. But Joseph was Jacob's firstborn son to the wife he loved most. And saying that out loud sounds pretty weird. But that's how the story goes. I didn't write it, all right? Jacob was in love with a woman named Rachel. I'm hopping around so many stories baked into this story in order for you to get what's going on here, all right? So Jacob, also known as Israel, Jacob was in love with a woman named Rachel, but Rachel's father tricked him into marrying Rachel's older sister Leah first. Yeah, so that happened. And so now he has two wives, one he loved, and the other one, not so much. So, but of course, Leah, the not so much wife, she had 10 sons with Jacob before Rachel had even had one. So I guess Jacob loved Leah at least a little bit. I'll just let that one roll for a little bit. Anyway, Jacob's in his old age when Joseph finally comes along, and Jacob makes no secret of the fact that Joseph is his favorite son. Joseph receives, and it's all kind of comes to a hilt when Joseph receives this gift from his father, a many-colored coat. Although some manuscripts just say that it was just a long coat. Either way, Jacob gives Joseph this fancy gift, and he leaves the other brothers out entirely. Now, I don't know how many of you here are more than one child or were one of several in a family, but just imagine, if you will, giving one of them a treasured gift and leaving the rest out. What would happen? I'm pretty sure, like just thinking back to Halloween this past week, if I were to give my son Silas like a Tootsie Roll and leave the sisters out, they wouldn't talk to me for a month. But this gift that Joseph received clearly got under his brother's skin. But don't worry, it gets worse. Joseph also rubs it in by having this mystical power of interpreting dreams. Did you catch that? So here's what Joseph says about a dream he had to his brothers who were already jealous of him. Joseph says this: Joseph had a dream, and he told it to his brothers, which made them hate him even more. He said to them, "Listen to this dream I had. When we were binding stalks of grain in the field, my stalk got up and stood upright, while your stalks gathered around it and bowed down to my stalk." His brothers said to him, "Will you really be our king and rule over us?" So they hated him even more because of the dreams he told them. So they already didn't like him. And then he says, "Hey guys, guess what I just dreamed up? You're all going to bow down to me." Neat, huh? I mean, this is clearly spoken from a golden boy place of privilege, right? He does not even realize what's going on because his father has doted on him so much that he is putting himself in mortal peril. Because the brothers were filled with hatred. They saw the favor that Joseph got from their father, and worse yet, he might actually be better than them. Let's just be honest. The way Jacob treated Joseph with this favoritism was not cool. Legitimately not cool. Especially considering that there were 2 generations of tradition in the family handing down the birthright to a younger son. Right? Imagine your father did it, and your fathers did it, and now you're one of the older sons looking around like, so which one of us is going to get the goods when dad dies? And Jacob made it so blatantly obvious that Joseph was his favorite. The other brothers weren't just jealous, they were threatened. They were threatened by the notion that Joseph might get everything and leave them out. And so, we shouldn't be surprised at what happens next. The brothers plot against Joseph, sell him into slavery, and they tell their dad that he died. That's how the story goes. And Joseph winds up as a household slave, gets falsely accused of rape, then thrown in an Egyptian prison. So from the timeline we get in Genesis, it looks like all in all, Joseph spent about 11 years working as a slave in Egypt and at least 2 more years in an Egyptian prison. That's a chapter I bet he'd prefer not have lived. He went from a happy-go-lucky daddy's boy to human chattel overnight. And we hear almost nothing about what was going on in Joseph's heart and mind during that time. That's just how Genesis is written, though. Genesis doesn't give us like the inside scoop on what people are feeling. It just says this happened, then this happened, then this happened. And we are left to draw our own conclusions. So I'm going to do some of that with you. We're going to draw some conclusions about this because that's the invitation in the scriptures. Because we know where this story leads. Because Joseph was sold into slavery, because he landed in Egypt, because he landed in jail, he wound up in exactly the right place at the right time so that he could climb the ranks and become Pharaoh's right-hand man. This is what happens. Joseph interprets a dream in prison and quickly is ushered into Pharaoh's court and placed in charge of the entire kingdom. He becomes the person who not only saved all of Egypt from a great famine, but who saved his own family as well. When they came to Egypt as refugees, desperate for food, his people were saved. His brothers, even the brothers that sold him into slavery, they get saved because they sent him into Egypt. Isn't that weird? Isn't that weird? His people were saved, a nation was saved, and Joseph was redeemed not in spite of his struggles, but because of them. And yes, he even became a hit Broadway musical too. That happened. I'm just going to shift for a moment. New story. The other day I was listening to an interview with a guy named Pete Holmes. He's a stand-up comedian turned podcaster, turned actor, turned author. And a little over a decade ago, Pete went through one of the most traumatic experiences anyone could ever go through. His wife unexpectedly up and left him. And in this interview I heard, Pete explained that his whole life, he was working under this contractual relationship with God. I'll follow the rules, and things will work out for me. He was raised in a conservative Christian home, and he knew, I won't swear, and I won't drink, and I won't smoke, and I won't sleep around, and God will look out for me. We got each other's backs. I do my part, and God will do God's part, and everything will work out at the end. It's this very kind of tit-for-tat version of Christianity. If I'm good, then God has to make things work out for me. And that system of belief works out great until it doesn't, right? At some point in life, and it will happen to all of us, the story of how everything works out just doesn't work out anymore. And we're left with one of two choices. Either God really does play this tit-for-tat game, and I guess I'm just no good. I guess I'm just unworthy of God's favor. Or maybe I was wrong about what God is up to. Those are the choices you're left with. And that's where Pete Holmes found himself. He rethought what it meant for him to relate to God. Not as some scary judge in the clouds who's making sure he's living up to some standard, but he thought more about God as ultimate source, abounding love, and is present in the very fabric of our awareness. And that tragic event, Pete Holmes says, it was the best thing that ever happened to him. Not because it was the source material for his own HBO show, though it was. Not because it gave him the seeds that turned into his best-selling book, though it was. He says that this was the best thing that ever happened to him because it forced him to look at those myths that he believed and enabled him to embrace a bigger, more loving version of the truth that could include his pain without dismissing it. And I heard this story, and I feel like the story of Joseph really isn't all that different from the story of Pete Holmes. Honestly, it feels like my story too. It's the story of anyone who's been hurt, anyone who's been let down, and who uses that struggle of doubt to unlock a deeper truth about what God is up to in this world, who uses their pain and struggle to unlock potential within themselves. I mean, remember, if you will, that if Northern Light Church hadn't faced some of the hardships that it went through, we wouldn't have become Roots and Branches. And I think we're all thankful for that change. So I have a few parting thoughts about Joseph that I'd like to leave you with. It's about Joseph, it's about Pete Holmes, it's about me, it's about all of us. Thought one: everything about your life is an opportunity. Everything about your life is an opportunity. Your gifts, your skills, your blessings, those are obvious opportunities, right? But so are the things you'd rather change. So are the things you would rather not have lived at all. Joseph's family of origin, as we have discussed, was a total mess. I'm sure he'd rather have had a father who showed the same lavish affection to all of his brothers, because then they wouldn't have sold him into slavery, right? I'm sure Pete Holmes would have preferred not to lose his marriage. But it turns out, those things in our past make us into who we are. And that doesn't mean we have to like every detail of our past, but it does mean that we can actually include those things from our past in our stories rather than burying them or neglecting them or trying to avoid them. Then we can reconcile ourselves to our past and become whole, and we can even see how God was there all along the way, even when we couldn't notice it. Even our trauma, even the scars, God can give you the strength to make a new reality and to see how God was there all along and move into a better future. So that's my first thought. Everything about your life is an opportunity. If we have eyes to see it and to claim it as an opportunity, it becomes one. Thought two: you get through the pain in life not by avoiding it, but by walking through it. Sitting in that Egyptian prison, Joseph could have given up. But his way out came because even though he was at his very lowest, he was still present to those around him. And so if you're feeling torn up inside by things that are going wrong in your life, don't dismiss those feelings. Pay attention to them. But know that your feelings aren't you. That's an important distinction. Your feelings aren't you. Before you ever failed, before you were ever hurt, you were already a beloved child of God. And that's the truest thing about you. That's the truest thing about you, is that you are loved by God. And with the confidence that comes from that truth, from really holding that truth close to your heart, you can face down whatever life throws at you, and you can grow because of it. You get through the pain in life not by avoiding it, but by walking through it. And third and finally, what you're going through, if you're going through a hard time, what you're going through is actually a building block that God can use to form you into who you were made to be. What you're going through is a building block that God can use to form you into who you were made to be. These hard things happen, right? They just happen, and we don't decide when or how they're going to happen. They just do. And they can, when you're going through a hard time, it can really feel like your situations are chipping away at you, like they're eroding your very self, like you're losing who you thought you were. But that's not what it is, even though that's what it feels like. Each day, as you walk through life, each day is a building block. One on top of the next, on top of the next. And those blocks have built on top of each other, one by one, until here you are. Here we are, together. The accumulation of our days and our nights, our experiences, our successes and our tragedies and our losses all come together to build the life that you have at this moment, like it or not. And now, it's up to you to decide what you're going to do with this building of a life that you have constructed one day at a time. This building with all its imperfections, all of its flaws, maybe not all the bricks quite fit the way you would have preferred. But here we are, in this day that is a gift from God for you. It's up to you to accept the invitation to see your struggle as a curse or as the key to realizing that you were blessed all along. Maybe we can learn a thing or two from these unlikely heroes like Joseph. But what these stories really tell us is that there is an unlikely hero waiting within all of us, ready to be set free.